Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Brandon Johnson back to the show. Brandon is the founder and CEO of Boston Microfluidics, a Boston-based biotech startup I've been keeping an eye on for about a half dozen years now. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to be back.
Brandon, we had you on the show 2 years ago to discuss a single-drop blood testing technology your company developed, which at the time was focused on over-the-counter STD testing. A lot has happened since then, both in the market and with your technology, and I wanted to ask you back for an update. First, remind us how your device works.
So it's a pretty simple user interface. You just prick your finger, add a drop of blood, close it, and then you get a result.
What does this thing look like?
It's like about the size of a toothbrush container. Actually, I think that's your line from the earlier. I use that all the time, actually, because it's pretty much
what it looked like to me when you brought it in.
Yeah, that's with some intention, right? We want it to look like a familiar consumer product so that when people are picking it up and using it, it feels like part of their normal life.
And it's a little plastic thing that slides open and closed?
Exactly, yeah. So when I hand it to people, they usually do the activation mechanism. They basically activate it.
Too soon.
Yeah, every time.
don't do this.
We're going to add like a little tab that you have to pull off that also shows you where your blood goes. Yeah, because the first thing that happens when I hand it to investors or anybody else is they slide it close.
So you prick your finger, you put one drop of blood in a little spot.
Yep.
You close it, and then what happens inside?
We basically had to take all the mechanisms that are inside the Centaur or one of the other major diagnostic machines that are used in the laboratory and replicate them in our device. And we had to do it on the order of like 7 cents.
But there's no machines in here.
No, I mean, it's all mechanically automated. So if I was in the lab doing this, I would use a pipetter, micropipetter, to collect the sample, which is the first step in any one of these lab tests. That's like a $300 piece of equipment, and we make the same thing for 7 cents, and it has the same performance as the $300 instrument.
And you use it once and throw it away.
Exactly, yeah. And it has to fit in your pocket, too. So we had some big constraints.
Tell us a little about the chemistry inside this device.
So we try never to develop, we were never going to develop a new assay. We only use tests that are being used by the medical community already, that have proven clinical relevance, that have been generally FDA cleared on another platform or approved on another platform. We try to stick to stuff that we know there's a need, a medical need, and are going to have real utility both to the patient and to their healthcare provider.
But you also provide reagents and fluids that go along with the blood and the assay itself?
Exactly, yeah. And because of our strategy, we're usually able to buy most of those right off the shelf from distributors. So our detection system inside most of our products is a lateral flow strip. And this was a technology that dominated the point-of-care space for a long time. But it came off patent in 2015, and now there's places that make them all over the world.
So the innovation here really is the microfluidics, which is, at the end of the day, plastic machining?
Exactly, yeah. And so what we did was take basically a giant robot that carries out everything a lab tech would and shrink it down into something that fits in your pocket.
And how many different kind of blood tests can this device be adapted to?
The things that we're looking at now are things like cholesterol, A1C, herpes, obviously, hepatitis C, HIV. But pretty much anything that's done as an ELISA, which is about 70% of medical tests, could theoretically be put into this. We want to just launch one product and do that well first.
And you get a binary outcome which says everything's fine or go see your doctor?
Yeah, absolutely. For herpes, hep C, those kind of things. But when we've done some experiments with A1C and cholesterol, you actually get a number. You
really?
Yeah. And we're able to hold pretty tight control on that result. One of the problems that tests like this can run into is if you run 50 samples from the same person and you get 50 different results, that's kind of a big issue, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we built our machinery inside the device to be very precise. And in fact, the measure of precision that the FDA uses is what's called the coefficient of variance. And that's measured as a percentage, and an acceptable range is maybe like 5 to 7%. And for just that metering part that we talked about before, just measuring the sample, our CV is actually 1.13%. So we're way under.
So you feel like you've got the technology knocked at this point.
Exactly, yeah.
What does it take to get this through FDA approval?
It depends. I mean, it depends on the different applications. If we were looking at herpes, it's hundreds of patients and studies in 3 locations. If we look at hepatitis C, which is actually a class 3, which is a more regulated disease, and they actually regulate by disease, not by product type for the most part. Yeah. That would be a substantially larger study. It could be $10 million to do that study.
Oh, geez. That's serious money.
Yeah.
So to date, you haven't taken any of these through FDA approval?
Nope, not yet.
How come?
So part of it's the expense. Part of it is the logistical aspects of it, but the biggest thing really is there's a perception amongst investors of uncertainty, both around the difficulty of getting through FDA. Many investors have the FDA in their mind as this nightmarish monster.
Thank you. That monster bit me a few times.
Right.
So
if you understand what drives them, they're very rational at the end of the day, but their incentives are not, or rather I should say disincentives. They mostly are afraid of something showing up in the Washington Post, are not really aligned with the rest of the industries. And it can take any amount of time. It's really hard to know how long those trials are going to take to get approval. It creates a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty.
So speaking of things showing up in the Washington Post, since last time we talked, another single-drop blood test company has been much in the news. That's Theranos. They seem to have created an enormous number of expectations they couldn't fulfill, getting the FDA really, really mad in the process. Refresh us on that unfolding story.
Theranos' vision, or at least what they articulated to the world, wasn't all that different from us. They were essentially saying that we need to have on-demand medical testing, that anybody should be able to go and get their tests done anytime they want, and they should have this inexpensively and easily.
And not have to get a big venipuncture tube of blood.
They made a big deal about not drawing blood from the arm, but of course, all the tests they're doing now are venipuncture draw, to my knowledge. They're actually drawing blood from people's arms in the places they're still testing.
Because their stuff didn't work.
According to the FDA, it's an unregulated medical device, which from the people that I've talked to means that, there was probably an issue with its performance.
But suppose they do get their technology to work at some point. How does their approach differ from Boston Microfluidics?
The vision that they have is that people will go to a Walgreens center, talk to, a nurse practitioner most likely, and get a test ordered and get their results there. I think that we want to take more of a Netflix approach. We want to bring this directly to the home. We want to give people what they're looking for without making them actually go to some physical location.
Wow.
We were talking about this with one of the investors, and he made the comment, so you guys are Netflix and they're Blockbuster. Well, it's not quite that simple, but I think there's a lot of value in our approach, and there's certainly somebody delivering well on what they're promising. There's value in that too, I think.
Assuming this comes to pass, how's the medical community going to feel about being disintermediated with that test?
Most of the ones that I've talked to will be very happy about it, actually.
Really?
Yeah. When I talk to folks at some of the different hospitals and major accountable care organizations, the cost associated with somebody, both from the terms of risk from hospital-borne infections and the actual monetary cost, is astronomical of them walking across the threshold into a hospital. So if they had their way, if they could deliver the treatment as well in a home setting, they would absolutely prefer that. So let's take the case of heart failure. So if we have a heart failure patient and they have a problem, they're admitted to the hospital, and they get treated, then they're released. Some hospitals have a double-digit readmissions rate, and when that person gets readmitted, if they're an accountable care organization, not only do they not get paid for all the costs of treating that patient a second time, their quality scores go down. So the next heart failure patient that they treat, they actually get paid less for.
So how does a home test help solve that problem?
They can actually monitor the patient in the home, and we're working on a study with a major hospital that we'll talk about in more detail once we have all the terms finalized. They're looking at monitoring that patient at home and intervening before they get to the point where they need to be readmitted. And these interventions are often relatively straightforward to administer in the home.
So this is just like taking your blood pressure at home or doing a diabetes blood sugar test, only you'd be doing it for other indicators.
Exactly. That's really what makes us different, too, is that our technology requires no training at all. If you look at even the OraSure HIV test, right? They have an in-office version and a home version. Well, they make a big deal about saying they're the same version, but in the office, it's almost 100% accurate. In the home, it's 91% sensitive, which means almost 10% of people who are positive who use this test get a negative result. So somebody who has HIV is being told they don't 9% of the time.
Yeah, that's serious.
Yeah, and that's totally because there's benefit to training with that test. With ours, the usability study that I do, I take it to the pub, and when somebody's 2 or 3 drinks in, I set it down in front of them, and without instructions or guidance from
Test
me,
their blood.
I see if they can do it. Yeah, and if they can't, then it's on me to go back and redesign my product until we get to the point where we can pass that test.
Here's what's so puzzling about this story. Theranos is what's called a unicorn, which is a private company valued at over $1 billion. They've raised over $400 million, much of which is at risk right now. The technology you developed at Boston Microfluidics has been demonstrated to work, at least for screening purposes, and it's faster and cheaper, yet you haven't been able to raise enough money to pay for FDA approval. How come venture capitalists aren't beating your door down?
Well, I think that Theranos might be a little bit better at telling the story than we are.
Plus, you don't have Henry Kissinger on your board.
Yeah, we decided not to take that approach to fundraising.
So, Brandon, you've taken a slow but steady approach to building your company. Who have you got helping you?
I've been very fortunate. Part of it's being here on the East Coast, but part of it's just being very aggressive about trying to track down the people who really know the most about this field and these kind of technologies. And so I've recruited as advisors CEOs, chief operations officers, head of R&D from Bayer, LabCorp, Johnson & Johnson's Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, people from Alere, which was one of the major point-of-care players until they got acquired by Abbott recently. And I even know the guy who oversaw the development of the Siemens instrument that Theranos ended up using when they decided the Edison wasn't performing well enough. And when you sit down with those guys, in fact, he and I got drinks a little while ago, and we were talking about actually developing one of those instruments and all of the problems that they faced and all of the things they had to overcome. So we actually got a complete problem set. By talking to those guys, we knew the total list of all the things that can go wrong and what we had to address with our technology. So we could start from a place of in-depth understanding of the existing technology when we tried to replace it. And it takes a long time to then build tools that can do the kind of things that our stuff does. I mean, we actually have to find a way to replace very sophisticated technology that you can spend $250,000 for with something that you toss when you're done with the test.
With little bits of plastic.
Exactly, yeah. And so we spent a lot of time really understanding that, and the way that we got there was that group of advisors.
And got there, it sounds like you did. The two key measures of successful entrepreneurship are often said to be perseverance and flexibility. You and I started talking, 6 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah. The fact that you're still standing checks the perseverance box, but I understand your go-to-market strategy is now taking you to Egypt. Why Egypt?
Well, there's a big problem in Egypt with hepatitis C, which is an application that our platform's really well suited to address. Hepatitis C infection is at 15% in that country, and it's caused by the international health community. During the 60s and 70s, there was a major effort by the international health community to eradicate schistomiasis, which is a parasite that's common in that region. During those efforts, needles and syringes were improperly used, and a massive outbreak of hepatitis C was caused by these efforts.
Spread by doctors.
Exactly, yeah. And we really have an obligation, I think, to go back and try and set this straight. We have 10, 15 million people in Egypt now that are infected with hepatitis C, much higher than most of the rest of the world.
But I understand there's a cure for hep C now, but it's extremely expensive.
It's about $84,000 in the U.S.
So that doesn't work in Egypt.
Well, it's interesting. Merck and Gilead both have cut licensing deals with other parts of the world, and they've gotten the price down in some places to hundreds of dollars, even few hundreds of dollars.
Huh.
So the biggest problem now is actually identifying those people who are infected so that we can get them the treatment, which is almost 100% effective.
So the game now is, can you test every person in Egypt?
Right, which is exactly what our technology is designed to do.
And how are you getting there?
We have a partner, actually, who they sort of found us. I was doing a lecture, and somebody came up to me afterwards. And they are one of the biggest medical groups in the Middle East and North Africa. It's called the Alaj Group. Mm-hmm. And they see the same future that we do. They see on-the-spot testing. They see being able to go to the patient and really having that face-to-face interaction with them on their terms.
So this is community health center kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't have to go to a central hospital. They don't have to...
And they have hospitals and they have labs, but they're very forward-thinking and they're very aggressive about moving into the future and all the areas where they work. And it's been a real pleasure working with them. My counterpart there and I have gotten to be good friends.
So describe the nature of the deal.
We're giving them exclusivity in the region, and in exchange, they're putting a lot of dollars behind the clinical aspects and helping with the regulatory environment in the different regions that they're going into. We've really built a partnership where we can deliver this in an effective manner.
Do you see them taking it into other countries?
Absolutely. And they've encouraged us, either with them or with others, to be all over the world as quickly as possible. In their minds, this is really a search and destroy mission to eradicate hepatitis C completely from the face of the earth. And we share that vision.
So if this works, it's certainly going to help your cash flow problems. It'll get you on the map. They're taking care of approvals over there?
Yeah. That's part of our relationship, is that they understand the regulatory bodies in those countries much better than we do. So they're going to be much more effective at pursuing that part of it.
So how does this test get back into the U.S.?
Well, the technology is fairly similar between those applications. If we look at hepatitis C and herpes, the difference is really small. And for some of our other tests, we actually won't have to change the plastic parts, the mechanics on the inside of the device at all. And so everything that we develop over there has huge benefit here. But the main risk with FDA is uncertainty and time, right? It can take longer than you anticipate.
That scares away investors.
Exactly. And if you have a solid revenue stream from other products in other parts of the world, that time concern and that uncertainty concern starts to diminish substantially, especially if the FDA sees us operating in these markets and behaving ourselves well. Really, the FDA's concern is keeping bad actors from being on the market. We need to show them in every possible way we can that we aren't going to be a bad actor. And part of that is actually, having this kind of global effort.
Well, they've been portrayed as the bad guy in some of these Theranos stories.
Yeah, they're really not.
I've got the impression they bent over backwards to give Theranos every opportunity here, and maybe their trust was abused.
I can't speak to that because I wasn't privy to any of those conversations. Our experience with the FDA has been much better. We've never had any problems where it wasn't clear what they were looking for and what they wanted. And usually what they look for is they want to know that what you're doing is accurate and reliable, and they want to know that there's a clinical utility, that there's some benefit to the patient or the consumer. And if you can answer those two things in a scientifically rigorous way, they have every reason to want to move forward with you. Some of our advisors were at the FDA, including a former deputy director, and she'd be the first person to tell you, their goal is not to keep products from getting on the market. Their goal is, make sure that they keep the public safe. That's their mandate.
But you're not looking to keep anything secret here either.
Exactly. We're in a slightly easier position when it comes that way. Our patents are all around mechanical devices, and if you want to know our secret sauce, it's disclosed on the patent and trademark. Yeah. So you can actually go and look at it. And this was architected really by one of our attorneys who used to be general counsel at Genzyme. We looked at the lateral flow patents and some other patents that have been really powerful in the space. And we said, is there a simplest form of this mechanism or these mechanisms that's sort of required to do this? Let's patent that. And that'll give us a very broad, strong mechanical patent. And then let's patent things underneath it that are more specific, that relate to these kind of things. So we were able to actually build a big patent portfolio that's very strong, that gives us a lot of protection. And through that process, we're able to actually disclose everything that is unique about our technology because it's protected. It's in the patent.
So, Brandon, after your journey takes you through Egypt, China, and the rest of the world, how do you come back to fulfill your original dream of over-the-counter STD testing?
So through a combination of the revenue we'll generate from these projects and additional capital that we'll raise, we'll fund those FDA trials, and then we'll hit the market with this product.
And what, put vending machines in bars?
If I can, yeah, absolutely.
So remind us what your original dream was for STD testing.
Well, if I had my way, everybody would be able to test themselves for herpes at home, right? And I've got a vested interest as a single guy in this being a successful product. So herpes isn't the end of the world, but just like giving the flu to your partner, you don't want to really get somebody else sick if you can avoid it. And so getting tested and having testing be something that's frictionless is something that I really think will change the way that we talk about these issues and think about these issues. But we know from the studies that have been done that just diagnosis alone reduces transmission dramatically in a lot of STDs and other infections.
But it's not just knowing your status, it's also demonstrating it.
Right, yeah. I think a lot of people are going to view this as a sort of necessary step in the way that they move forward. And I talk to couples all the time now that go and get tested at Planned Parenthood and other places to know their status. And really it's about making that process easier. And I don't think it's that, everybody worries that if you've got herpes, now you're out of the dating pool. That's not going to happen, right? So one of our partners is the STD Project. Janelle Marie runs that, and she's very open and vocal about having herpes. And her last boyfriend and her dated for 5 years, and he's still
herpes-free.
Yeah. And so just knowing and being aware and taking some fairly straightforward steps kept him from contracting it, and I'm sure both of them are happy that was the outcome. So there's a lot of benefit in being able to find out your status, I think. And it's something that I think a lot of millennials, and certainly I view as being an important part of being a responsible partner.
Brandon, you've been at this a long time. I don't know how many times I've had lunch with you over the years, sort of checking in on you. How come you're not burned out yet?
Well, so I said earlier in this conversation, we've got these advisors who have been major players in all these top companies, and it took them this long. So, developing one of these products, it's a long process, and it's really part of what's kept me going is knowing that it's not long for just me. This is sort of standard for the industry. But the other thing is, I get to wake up every morning and think, hey, I might help eradicate hepatitis C. That's a pretty good thing to spend your time on.
It's different than coming up with a new app on the iPhone, huh?
Right, yeah. And as excited as I am, we actually are building a partnership with a dating app now. As exciting as those things are, I really can't imagine myself leaving this to go do that.
So how can people learn more about Boston Microfluidics?
So we've got a website, bostonmicrofluidics.com. You should go check it out. And, if you're really interested in getting some more information, you can always send an email to info@bostonmicrofluidics.com.
So, Brandon, it's exciting to see you still at it. Thanks for coming back to give us an update.
Thanks for having me on. This is always fun.
That was Brandon Johnson, CEO of Boston Microfluidics, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at realclearmarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a boutique property management company in Boston's South End. We'd also like to give a special shout-out to our newest listeners joining Real Clear Radio Hour on Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. Michigan's historic Hillsdale College is an independent liberal arts university that prides itself on not taking a single dime of state or federal taxpayer money. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.